The sea was still. Not calm. Still. A heavy, unmoving kind of quiet. The kind that made the traveler feel small. His boat floated, untouched. No wind pushing it forward. No waves against the hull. Just an endless stretch of open water, holding him in place. He sat unmoving. He wasn't sure how long he'd been like this. Maybe minutes, hours, longer. He couldn't tell. His hands rested on the oars, but they felt far away. His thoughts circled inward, looping, circling the same unanswered questions. Am I even going the right way? Does any of this even matter? Time blurred. The world around him faded. He wasn't sinking, not exactly, but he wasn't moving either. Just adrift. Stuck. Frozen somewhere between past regrets and future fears. Trapped in the space between them. Then, a thud. His head snapped up. It wasn't loud, but it was real. A dull, solid sound against the side of his boat. He turned, blinking against the glare of the sun, and floating beside him, bumping gently against the hull, was a piece of driftwood, worn smooth by the water, aimless, just like him. For a long moment, he just stared. It wasn't important. It wasn't a message or a sign or really anything at all, but it was here, and so was he. He let out a slow breath. His fingers twitched against the oars. The sun had shifted. The horizon looked different. He had drifted, not by choice, not by effort, but because he hadn't been here. With a steadying breath, he sat up, adjusted his grip, and turned his gaze forward. He didn't know how far off course he had gone, but he knew one thing. He had to start steering again. This is So What? Who Cares? With Lora McCarville and me, Jeff Kolaski. Join us as we explore practical insights for an impractical mind. We all react to stress differently.
True.
And we respond differently depending on a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is just kind of who we are, maybe.
Maybe.
Like it's what we've been through.
Sure.
Can play a part in that.
Yep.
What this situation is. And generally, there's a few different ways that we respond to that stress. We fight, we flee, we shut down, or we try to keep peace at all costs, correct?
Okay. So I think what we're speaking to is kind of the buzzword of what people are talking about right now, which is nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in that world for a long time of teaching the nervous system. And today we're going to talk, and sometimes they say like the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
Right.
It's definitely more complex than that, and the science is always changing.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're talking about the freeze, collapse.
Okay.
And a bit about fawn. So one way in which our nervous system sort of goes into play. But not one thing is everything.
Right.
And everything isn't one thing. And I want to make sure that when we're talking today that it's not from a pathological lens. Maybe even if we could entertain it more metaphorically or use our imagination when we're talking about the nervous system response. Sure, we could go into the science, but then we engage again in this like left side of the brain and this way in which, and there's arguments on Reddit about like it's this or that, but I don't think that's necessarily beneficial.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not going to, I think we can just like touch into it a little bit more this way, like storytelling.
You know that I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to talk about freeze fawn with collapse and some other things in there.
Mm-hmm.
Our next episode that we do will focus more on the fight and flight side of things.
Yeah.
And we'll discuss what these things mean, or like what they look like, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How they show up in our nervous system, and hopefully have a better understanding. My hope here is that we have a better understanding of each of them so that we can find a way to work through them, with them.
Yeah.
Not feel trapped by them.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what we're hoping to do here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly what we're hoping to do.
So the 4 F's, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Why do we respond in these ways?
Well, we go back to the understanding that we're wired for survival. And so these are part of our survival brain. This is so when we have threat, either real or perceived, then our brain does its job and goes into a survival. And today we're talking about freeze, collapse, fawn. So that would look like freeze, which is
actually
active.
Freezing. Yeah.
Right. And that's very active. Collapse is like the whole body gives up, right? Or fawn, which is appeasing.
Keeping peace at all costs.
Keeping peace, kind of staying connected. Very different than the other two, but still in that same vein. So
why are we starting freeze fawn?
Now, this is interesting. If we go back to the hand model of the brain, we would say that, and again, I want to use this more in like a storytelling, metaphorical way. But let's say this is the hand model of the brain. So I've got my thumb. For those who are just listening, my thumb's tucked in my fist here. At the very base of the wrist is where the freeze is, or collapse. And we would say maybe like my chickens have that freeze response. So we would say evolutionary. It's like the oldest response.
If I'm not moving, they maybe will lose interest. So we're clear. These things are not always a bad thing.
Not at all a bad thing.
Right.
It's how we got here.
It's how we're still here.
Yeah.
It's how we're
still here.
Evolving, if that's what we're still doing.
Yeah.
Devolving? Some things. Sometimes it feels like we're doing that. Anyway, so I guess I'm a little unclear, and maybe you can clear this up. What's the difference between freeze and collapse? I get like the physically collapsing, but like, is that not kind of the same thing?
Yeah.
Is it really similar?
So I think there was a time in which we thought the nervous system was like gas pedal or brake. And now we understand it's much more nuanced than that. Okay. And so in freeze, our heart rate can still go up. There can still be activation, which would maybe be more like the gas pedal.
Right.
In collapse, we actually are more on the brake. And so that's more of no movement, heart rate slowing down. Both things affect the digestion. Both things affect, but it would feel different in the body.
Right. Okay.
Can I tell a story?
Please.
Okay. The story's right on time because this amazing family I grew up with on a farm. Recently, just yesterday, he actually had a heart attack and died. So my heart is like telling the story is so sweet because he played such a role in my life. So
Yeah.
there's this farmer, and his daughter and I were best friends. And he had hogs. And I don't know if you're familiar with what happens when you have hogs, but there's this thing called the hog wash, which is where all the poop goes. And in the winter, it's kind of like an ice skating rink,
Okay.
but it's not.
Right.
It's frozen poop.
Right.
And so what we would do is we'd put on Tom's cowboy boots and we'd go out ice skating on the hogwash, which is really fun when it's actually frozen.
Solid, yeah.
So on this day, it wasn't frozen solid.
Oof.
And the ice collapsed. It fell in.
Okay.
Jennifer, my best friend then, and her brother Tim made it to the edge. But I kept reaching for the next piece of ice and it would collapse.
Ooh.
And I'd reach and it would collapse. And I was 100% sure I was going to drown that day in hog shit. And across the farm comes Tom, the farmer, and he's yelling, "Stand up! Stand up!" Because we're screaming, right? And he yells this, and I sort of get my bearings together, and I stand up, and it's like up to my knees. Wow. I had frozen. My legs gave out. I had no sense of legs.
Yeah.
Only my arms worked. My heart rate was still up, but I had no capacity. Like, it was gone. My legs were gone.
I am dying here, and there's nothing I can do about it.
There's no legs. I froze.
Wow.
And which speaks a lot to when we talk co-regulation, we talk like connection, right? It was him yelling at me to stand up that got me to recognize, So I stood up and was able to get to the edge.
And you probably look around and like, I feel a little silly now.
Well, I also was like, we're in trouble.
Oh, yeah. His boots are really dirty right now.
He actually, a pair of boots were lost, and he had Jennifer go back in. He's like, "Get back in there."
Oh, wow.
Boots. I mean, we were not supposed to be wearing his cowboy boots on that pond.
Yeah, that's not a good thing to lose to the pig shit.
No. So thank you, Tom, for that.
Yeah.
Stand up. And I'm so appreciative of that. That applies to so many things.
Yeah.
But
just stand up.
Stand up.
Yeah.
We need that message a lot, don't we?
We do.
Because what happens when we perceive threat, in that case it was real, external,
sure.
But when we perceive threat, real or even not, we lose our legs. The rug's pulled out from under us.
That's one of the responses we could have.
One of the responses, and the one we're sort of talking about today, that vein today.
So that was freeze, not collapse.
It was not collapse. Collapse would have been...
You were heightened.
That's right. I was heightened. My heart rate was up, but could not feel my legs. Not because they were cold.
Right. They were, but that wasn't
That's a lie. Right.
Those things, they show up in our body, our mind. When we talked earlier, we'll call it our pre-production, which is just us texting throughout the week, right?
Yeah.
You use the word functional freeze. Where does that play into this? And if I were to guess, I don't know this, but if I were to guess, that would be a time when freezing serves a positive purpose for what we're doing.
Okay, so I wouldn't even say it serves a positive purpose, but it is that sense of I can't feel myself. I'm in danger. And yes, I'll get right back to you on the email. Like you're still functioning at your work or in your family, but you're not fully present. You don't have access to your sensations. You don't have access to even we talk about values. Like there's some things in which you're just yesing to or getting done, but you might even do that thing of like, I don't know. How did I get here?
Oh, yeah. So you're still able to finish the conversation. You're still able to like you said, finish the email, do the thing, whatever it may be, but you're kind of just, so you still have your what's the word? You're functioning, you're still doing, I mean, in functional freeze, it's pretty self-explanatory.
My teacher, Jane Clapp, in Movement for Trauma Recovery, she calls it activated freeze. And I like that because your muscles are still, like if you take your arm and you turn it on, you squeeze, like you're frozen, but you're still getting it done. You can imagine then the long term of that too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've got all these aches and my back hurts and my arm.
It's like after you are driving through a snowstorm and you get out and you're like, oh, I'm so sore, I'm tired, my muscles are, but you weren't moving, you weren't doing anything. But
okay, so in that case, that took a lot of presence to get through the snowstorm. Your body was on because you were in a higher state of adrenaline. That's like good stress.
Sure.
Right? I hope that you weren't necessarily in functional freeze.
Okay. Unless that was the passenger.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great, that would be a great example, because in that case, the passenger would be like,
yeah, I hope.
Good job, honey.
And I have no control over this.
Right.
So, yeah.
So it's a bit different. Maybe words of encouragement came easy, but but
yeah.
not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So internal and external causes for this sort of thing can happen both. We've talked about some external. What are some things what are the internal causes for this?
So some thoughts make thoughts and some thoughts make action. And so let's go back to when I fell in the ice skating pond. That event.
Tell it what it was.
That was, I know.
It was not an ice skating pond.
I know. Yeah. I didn't know it wasn't. It took days too to recover from that.
No bad.
From the sense of the smell, but not from the actual event. I knew I had survived. The event was over. I felt it was over. I didn't hold on to it anymore. So in that moment, it was external, but it never became an internal ruminating thought. It never became an internal experience where I was like, oh, that was so bad. I feel so bad. Or there was nothing left of it. When it was done, it was done. Sometimes things happen where they're external and then they live internally in this little thing that doesn't have much of a timekeeper.
Right. Yeah.
And then.
So like when you stepped on your dad's finger.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Would that be?
That would be something that lived internally as a truth that I broke my dad's fingernail, I was 4, impossible. But that was then a truth. I had thought, it had pictures, it had feelings, and I carried that with me.
Right.
Now, in the way of functional freeze, if it's internalized through for a long time, it can look then like not functional freeze. Let's move to collapse.
Okay.
It could look like depression. So if I'm carrying a story, an event, if I have a thought that hasn't been checked from childhood or something later in life, coming of age years, and I'm holding it, and I'm holding it, and I'm holding it, and I have sort of this sense of internalized learned helplessness as
sort of like when this happens, I turn to stone kind of deal.
Okay, collapse feels different than stone.
You're on collapse. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit different. But the same thing can happen in activated freeze.
Okay.
We can get stuck in an event, or maybe it's not an acute event. It's just our culture and how we grew up, our family. Something happens where that part of the nervous system gets turned on, and then we internalize it. So then the response is coming from our internal experiences, our brain's responding to that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So those same neurochemical drugs are being sent, the same action in the body is being sent, but nothing's going on out there. It's coming from in here.
Right. And there may be things out there that are maybe subconsciously reminding me of it, but it's not from that.
That's true too.
Okay.
And that counts. Okay. That's a big thing of being a human, our subconscious, which I can't wait to get into that because that's like, that's so fun and juicy.
Yeah.
But for sure that happens.
So you talked about getting stuck in a freeze response or in any of these without realizing it, or do I know it? Are we aware of that?
So it's kind of interesting because sometimes we're aware and sometimes we're not. Sometimes it's so normalized too, or we identify with it, like maybe a kiddo. If we go to like kids, it's easier to look up at maybe a kiddo in collapse. We would maybe in school be like, oh, he's just so lazy. Ugh. So when I train teachers and I work in like nonprofits and work with people who work with kids, it's really important for us to learn how to recognize what's nervous system. And then sometimes prolonged states become like personality.
Yeah.
Or identity. Like I don't even want to give up this personality.
Because I'm just a lazy person. Or
I'm just lazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So unmotivated. They can get called names, right?
It's now it's a title. Now it's a
pathology.
Yeah.
Or they were so easy to parent.
Yeah.
Right? Those who tend to collapse or activated freeze or fawn, people go, oh, they're just so nice. They're so easy.
Right. So culture plays a lot into these. We get rewarded and or punished for these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So our culture plays into it. Our familial values plays into it. Our role in which our family casts us, generational trauma plays into it. Everything plays into it. Epigenetics will play into it. So
what are some ways that you feel that culture rewards these states?
Well, I would say now,
like an example, I guess.
Okay, so I would say if we move to the fawn part, which fawn is so unique in the way in which all the other responses, you disengage from the threat. And fawn, you actually engage with the threat to appease it, to make it go away, to soften maybe what the threat could be. And so in that way, we can develop a lot of niceness, right? So is it something I'm doing, or is it I'm being so nice? I'm being nice to make the threat go away. And that becomes part of like a very rewarded, I don't know, what a good boy he is.
Sure. What comes to my head when you talk about that is, so I've done quite a bit of like security training and de-escalation training and things like that. And that can feel a lot like the same.
Oh yeah, like befriending the
right, or not even necessarily befriending, but like being able to let's just say I'm in a position where I'm providing security for something. Right?
Okay.
An organization, an event, a person, whatever it may be, and you come in and you are very clearly a threat to whatever's happening.
Okay.
Right? It is in my job and my training to go up and engage you, right? So, but not to aggravate you further, not to make the situation worse, not to cause a situation, but to connect with you, and give you an out, give you a reason to not progress further, and to cause a potential situation to go in a way that's not.
That's a perfect example of fawn, but the difference is that you have agency over it.
Yes, that was what I was interested to get into, because there's a big difference there.
We go back to like this. So the thing happens in which you go, oh, that kept me safe. The fawning of that. Or you have a perception, especially when we work with adults who are kind of remembering their childhood, let's say, or you're sitting with like, oh, I really did this thing. And then I would say like, you were 7. Like you actually didn't have that kind of control.
Right.
Right. But we have this perception that we were able to change the environment by being so nice. And we were able to take the threat away, that then we go, oh, I see. So some of that can become conscious. The nervous system responses are not like conscious choices. They happen autonomically. They happen like fast, right? But fawning it's like that. It's so quick, it's so fast, it's so easy. You said this thing where you went through training to be able to de-escalate or connect with this person, and so that whole thing right there, you were in training, you had agency, there was the point to it, it was your actual job, you're an adult. But that action of like being like nice to manage threat, that's a bit different when it's so just comes from that
reactive?
Automatic. Yeah. That
automatic,
Right. Just like the freeze, like, right? Like any of those other responses, they're that fast.
So what do we do about it? I mean, obviously we've talked about that that there is sometimes some benefit of this response, right?
Yes.
Because
huge.
Because some of these threats are real, potentially. And even if they're perceived,
the brain responds the same.
It's going to respond the same. But we can get stuck in that, right? We can respond in those ways when it's inappropriate.
Okay, so
how do we move
this
through
is what's curious.
What do we do
right?
with this knowledge of what these states are?
So there's a lot of empowerment that comes from just recognizing the state in yourself when the threat is no longer, or when you catch yourself in thoughts that are causing the state. So just knowing it, if we're not aware of it, then the language that we often develop is that thing of like very shamey, guilty language, or I'm just such a nice person, I can't help it. Or we start to kind of identify. So why I think what's empowering about nervous system language, and that people are really grabbing onto it, is that we then get to go like, oh, this isn't actually me choosing to do this. So I'm not going to shame myself. Like I'm not going to shame myself that my legs gave out and there's nothing I could have done different. And then sort of being able to watch ourselves go in and out of the states. What we want to remember is it's not that we won't have the state. It's not that we won't experience it. It's that how quickly do we come back to, or can we come back to the self?
Our window of capacity.
Our window of capacity. Okay. That's right.
If I'm realizing or recognizing, or somebody close to me or is realizing or recognizing that I have not came back into that window, that I'm stuck, I'm frozen, and I can't seem to get out of it. The threat's no longer in front of me, and I'm frozen, or I'm still I'm still fawning. I'm still, what are some practical ways that we can shift out of that? Even if I know it, I realize it in myself, I'm frozen right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still in this. It might not be as immediate, but I'm still here.
Yeah. There's this like place in which it becomes prolonged, nummy, dissociative, depression, these kind of things. So there's a few things that are fun that we can do. And this is where we get into how does play or an engagement in the body, like somatics, how do these things start to heal the nervous system response,
right?
Stuckness, for lack of better words. I think for me, when I go to my experience of working with hundreds and hundreds of kids and adults, freeze dance. Remember playing freeze dance? Where you turn, okay. Oh, this is so fun. I wish we could play it right now. You put on music.
We're not doing it.
I don't freeze dance.
Look at me. Do I look like someone who freeze dances?
I don't know you that well yet, but at some point we may have to.
Good
so
luck.
you put on. I like being stuck.
Yeah.
This is who I am.
I'm not frozen.
That's right. I mean, that's such a great example, right?
Yeah.
So putting on music, dancing, then stopping the music and saying freeze. And then you put on the music and you dance and you dance and dance, freeze. So what we're working with then is like that pendulation of going in and out, but we're approaching it kind of like you do a cat from the side. You know, you don't come straight on at a cat.
Sure.
You kind of come from the side. This is one of the things we get to do that that's very playful, very fun, very curious. You know, everyone says shaking. That can be something too. Starting to shake, shaking your hand, shaking your body, shake. But for a longer time than maybe not like 5 seconds like I did, but really letting your body just shake. Thoughts will come. This is so stupid. I'm being so lame. What
if
no
someone
one's
saw
watch me?
What if we podcasted and we're recording it while I was doing that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I can take those 5 seconds that you did that and I can put it on repeat and we can just watch it. So.
Frozen. What are you doing? I don't know. Where was I? That's another one. You know, taking a tennis ball and tossing it in the air. And then I'll say, like when I'm working one-on-one with people, I'll say, now freeze. And they'll hold it. And what happens is you get this feeling of like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
This is bothering me.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah. You're like the feeling of stuckness, the feeling of I don't have autonomy, the feeling of I'm going to die can come up. And I go, okay, go again. Oh, relief. Now I'm learning things end, right? Freeze. Well, yeah. And then the feeling, okay, work with that. And so we start to create sort of this dual awareness again.
It's so interesting how all the things that you've said have been physical things. None of it's been talk through it. None of it's been, let's meditate, which maybe is good for certain things.
I'm really glad you brought that up because a lot of people will say meditate, yoga nidra.
What's that?
That's like a deep state of like relaxation. Okay. It's like awake sleepfulness. There's different approaches that are down regulating. Everyone wants to down regulate. When you're down regulated in this freeze, collapse, fawn stuff, we actually want to find some autonomy. We want to take up a little bit of space. Yeah. We need to be able to move a bit and feel our legs.
Yeah. Stand up.
That's right. Yeah. Wiggle your toes, your toes.
In our pre-production meeting, you mentioned the word titration.
Yeah. So titration is doing it a little bit at a time.
Okay.
So if we could build that
similar to like when you talk about titrating things in medicine and whatnot.
Yes.
Like it's just little by little, right?
Little by little. Okay. So we're building not a tolerance to the state, but an ability to be with some of that stuff. And we move in and out. So pendulation is like back and forth. And maybe we shake a little longer. Maybe we freeze a little longer with awareness. Maybe we stand a little bit bigger. And so, yeah, bits by bits. We don't go straight into the thing.
I'll tell a little bit of a story here.
Oh, good.
In general, I think in my life, I'm an action guy, right? When I want to solve a problem, when there's a problem, there's a thing going on, I want to solve it. I want to and in most scenarios, I feel like I'm pretty good about waiting until after the situation to really emotionally respond to things, things that are immediately stressful that make me feel like I'm generally, I feel like I'm quote unquote good at let's solve this first, let's get it taken care of, let's action, and then we'll feel the things afterwards, right? for example, I've been involved in some pretty horrific like first aid responses, right? Like I said, I work security, some pretty scary ones that even though that's my job and that's all that, it's still your adrenaline, your heart rate gets up. But I was, for the most part, pretty happy with how I responded to those things. Now, again, those are my job, that, whatever it may be, but it seems to hit a little differently when it's on a severely personal level. I had a situation this last year, and I won't go into like the exact details. It's still a little raw. But my response surprised me because it was definitely a freeze situation based on what we're talking about. Maybe even collapse a bit. Because, so we had some pretty heavy stuff going on at home. We've alluded to that in past conversations. When it hit me, it was like all of my attempts to problem solve had failed. So my brain wouldn't let me, it felt like, it wouldn't let me fight because the people involved were too important to me. And so I couldn't fight. And for that same reason, I couldn't flee because that to me, like, wasn't an option, right? So, but my stress level was so high. I mean, I could taste metal in my mouth, which I read.
That's a great cue too. Yeah.
Which I read that a lot of times saliva glands can do certain weird things. And that's, for the first time in my life in the past year, I found out that was a thing that happened to me, right?
Yeah.
But what I did when my problem solving, talk it out, figure it out, work it out, that had failed. And the stressful thing is right here in front of me. I can't fight it. I had the wherewithal to say, I can't risk what would happen if I fought this thing. I can't run away, even though that might feel like what I want to do right now. I can't. So what I did was nothing. I became basically useless. And that was like, I can't help. I can't offer good words. I felt like I was of no use to anyone, including myself. And I froze. Like, I felt like I could barely even blink. I was just kind of like, and everything after that is kind of a blur. Like, I don't really know what immediately happened.
Can I ask, not for detail, but was it an acute moment? Like, it was something that happened in that moment, it felt like you froze, or were you like, when you say, so fight, flight, like, those are things that happen automatically. Your strategies that you had seem really solid. Like, you have like problem solving, and you have a lot of solid strategy. You wouldn't have been able to, if you were going to fight or flight, you wouldn't have had a choice. Your body just would have done the thing. I'm fucking out, right? And would have stormed out. So that you were saying I couldn't do that. Well, so I'm hearing like you still had agency or awareness of some sort, but maybe the overwhelm, or was it an acute moment, or did it feel like was it one of those things that happens over time and it was an overwhelm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it was an acute moment. Truthfully, I can't remember I can't think of a time where I had no agency over how I responded. I don't know.
Yeah. So to me, what I'm hearing, and if I'm wrong, you just let me know. To me, what I'm hearing is that prolonged stress, or the overwhelm did send you into a collapse. And it wasn't a choice. If you could have come up with strategy, you would have.
I was out.
And that, when you go into that state, when you land there, you have no choice. It's done for you to keep you alive. Because now what your brain isn't worried about keeping your people alive around you. It wants you to stay alive. And you doing what was going on before wasn't working. So we're just going to shut this system down.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But I felt like, and I'm hearing you, and that to me makes sense. But I felt like I knew that fighting or running was not an option here.
Yeah, the fact that you knew it wasn't an option tells me that, like, when you go into fight or flight, it's automatic. There's no like, fighting is not an option. That's not even a thought. You just throw the punch, right? You raise your voice, you freak out, like whatever it is. So you were able to be like, oh, that's not an option, fighting or flighting. But it wasn't that you also said, so then I will freeze.
Right.
You just went into it.
Yeah.
This is really interesting in the way of like what we think we should respond with, how we should respond versus how our nervous system will. So if we go back to the hand model, we remember that your survival response will override. Its one job is to keep you alive. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing. It will override and do exactly what it's meant to do, which keeps is to keep you alive. And in that case, it looked like we're just going to shut it down for a bit, which doesn't feel, especially if there's some dissociative pieces or that cloudy thing that happens, the nummy stuff, like that's very disorienting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's why this came up when I was thinking about examples of this, was because that's not usual for me.
Yeah.
I don't normally have nothing to say or nothing to do.
Yeah.
Like I usually feel like I can figure that out, but it wasn't there.
Yeah, and we do have tendencies towards, I mean, I will say that my legs giving out, that wasn't the first time that it happened on the pond, and it wasn't the last time. It's happened several times.
Sure.
So we do have tendencies towards certain states. So when the other one comes, it can kind of shock us or surprise us. Like, wow, this doesn't even feel like me. I don't even recognize myself like this.
So before we go, for someone who may be listening that may recognize some of these patterns that are state, that maybe they're in this state, or maybe this is maybe their general reaction to things. I like to end our episodes with something that we can do right now, like something today, even if it's just a small thing, to start kind of shifting or helping us through this. Do you have something that you want to give to me and our friends?
Yeah. So singing out loud, singing in your shower, singing in your car, singing really loud.
It's also the best way to spread Christmas cheer.
I know.
Singing loud for all to hear.
I love Elf.
Me too.
So good. He's so good. So singing and saying no. No. And that can be a practice with someone. Or it could just be a practice on your own. No.
For fawning or for freeze and fawn?
For both.
Really? No.
So if I were practicing with someone, and it would be, and let's say it's in here or with a friend, and we're working on growing this capacity for disappointment, for taking up space, right? It would look like me asking you a series of questions and you saying no. And no matter how I ask, then you say no.
You want to try it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think. Oh, I noticed you have this really cool knife. And I'm going to ask for this knife. And no matter how I ask, I want you to say no.
No. I wasn't supposed to start yet.
No. I will note that because this isn't the predominant state you work with, you may find this easier.
Sure.
But let's try. Okay. Can I have your knife?
No.
Please?
No.
I really need it though. I've got something over here I need to cut and it'll just take a second. Can I just have your knife?
No.
But I really like your knife.
Me too. But no.
Give me your knife.
No.
Say it louder. Give me your knife.
No.
Give me your knife.
No.
There you go. Okay, good. Good. So it is a playful way.
But I can even as someone who doesn't always struggle with no, I do. If you were my wife, that would have been a harder conversation for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Truthfully. I mean, if because I don't like to not help her get the things she needs or wants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. And it is something that we struggle with. So when we were doing that, did you have any sense of like, I can give her the knife?
Yeah. I mean, with knowing what the exercise we were doing, obviously that I can act it out even if I'm not truly. If we were in a real conversation and you asked me that as a friend, of course I would. You know, I could probably be talked into that, and it would be hard for me to tell you no about no. What would be the use of telling you no in a real situation? But yeah.
But we're in situations all the time where a no is really needed.
Yes.
Where our opinion really matters, where our voice is really important, and in those freeze, fawn, collapse states, or freeze, collapse, fawn states, we lose our voice, we shrink. We sink, and we don't take up the space.
I think that's really powerful. I mean, even doing that just now, I mean, it does trigger a little a piece of me. It's like it wouldn't be it wouldn't be normal for me to tell you no to something so small. But when it becomes not small, I can see how that is a good practice.
Right. So if it's like, let's say the knife is like something really important to you, and even if it's just a little bit, and you don't want me to use your knife, it's just sharpened or something, you go ahead and give it to me because you don't want to be an asshole, right? And there's like a sense of you don't want to.
Yeah.
But we're constantly in these environments where we're appeasing, where we're fawning, where we're freezing, right? We could go into this more, and we will at some point, but you know, that is a very common response with threat, especially for women. Us learning how to say no in those environments, us changing the dynamic around, and a lot of this comes from Cassie Urbanichek's Unbound book, which is so brilliant. But this activity here is really a powerful one of learning how to say no.
I could definitely see that and see the benefit of practicing it.
Yeah, that's
Just
the
like anything else.
titration, right? Remember we were saying, well, what's titration? A little bit at a time. That's the titration right there.
Yeah, you're gonna become more comfortable with anything you train with. If you're training, or you can call it training, you can call it practice, you can call it whatever you want, but you're gonna become better at it and more comfortable in that world. So yeah, I think that's really cool. So freeze and fawn, these are just two or collapsed 2-3 pieces of the nervous system response to stress and threat and things like that. In the next episode, we're going to discuss fight and flight.
Yep.
What if freezing or keeping the peace isn't your instinct? What if you feel the need to fight or flee? That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So
cool.
You don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
We're going to be there, and we're pretty cool sometimes. This, of course, has been So What? Who Cares? I'm Jeff. That's Lora. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Our traveler adjusted his grip on the oars, eyes on the horizon once more. He wasn't sure how long he'd been drifting, but that didn't matter now. What mattered was that he had noticed. The sea would still be there, the thoughts would still come and go, but now he knew When he lost himself in the sea within, he could always find his way back.